So today I'm here to present one of my research projects in Talan company, which is integrating AI and using biomechanics to support injury prevention. So Dennis already spoke to me and about my parcours in general. I have joined the Talan group a bit more than 1 year ago as a research engineer, where I'm leading several projects, one in biomechanics, but also in generative AI. I have some others on carbon print, and I'm also working with some clients in the energy field, where I'm accompanying them, in fact, to use AI in their technology. So I'm still treating about temporal series, signal processing, which is my main field, I will say, and my expertise for different applications. For the people who don't know who is Talan, Talan is an international consulting company, in fact, present in 21 countries, and it operates mainly in advanced field or technology, as I can say, which can be artificial intelligence or big data management. And we have different sectors, in fact, of competencies, which can be transportation, finances, economics, energy, or again, healthcare, like the project I'm going to present you today. But why Talan is a bit peculiar compared to other companies, is because Talan is dotted of a research center in innovation, led by Laurent Servonis, that some of you already know, I think, in this room. So we are 20 PhD in this team. We come from really various teams. As Denis said, I come from wave physics and more specialized in seismology, but I have some colleagues who come from neuroscientists, data scientists, computer vision, deep learning or machine learning thesis. We have made in 2024 more than 1,400 days of research, so it's a lot of days. Of course, it's not just the PhD in Talan. We have a lot of consultants working with us. We can help, in fact, which help us mainly, in fact, to make research projects on several little steps, and that have led to more than 40 publications in 2024, national and international conferences. And also, what we are really proud of is this certification, HRS4R, which is a certification in excellence in research, which take care ethics, the quality of the research, integrity, and the professional development. And we are the first, in fact, industry in France to obtain this one for private sector. So it's a really big step for us in 2024, and we hope to continue on this for the next years. Our research center is mainly composed of 4 main poles. The first one is managerial and practices and innovation, where we are going to make research about management evolution, leadership, employees' commitment, or managerial impact of artificial intelligence. We have a second one, which is about governance and technology assessment, where we are using mainly generative artificial intelligence, and we are trying to determine its evaluation, its performances, and also the bias linked to this kind of technology. The third pole is about the carbon print and CSR performance, like the project HOP I'm going to speak to you really briefly just after, but also the carbon print and growth, or some projects around hydrogen. And finally, the last pole is about technology application and business cases, where we have some projects around detection of fraud. So we use computer vision, sport injury, like the project I'm going to speak to you about today, biotechnology, or again, supply chain. So to speak to you really briefly about some of the projects of the center before beginning into the core of this presentation, we have the HOP project, which is led by Dr. Steve Bellart, and the objective of this project is to assess and reduce the carbon footprint of consulting assignments. As you know, Talan is a consulting company, so we are used to send different consultants, in fact, in different companies that have a cost in terms of carbon emission. So the aim of this project, in fact, is to try to automate the estimation of the carbon print of each mission, of the travel of the consultant, of the cloud tools is going to use to the client's mission, in fact, to try to reduce the carbon print not just of the mission, but of the Talan group carbon print. So in general, this project is really well integrated in Talan, and it allows the employees, in fact, to adopt a low-carbon alternative, for example, taking the train instead of the car, or the metro instead of something else, and allow us, in fact, to make several partnerships with other enterprises to have like better prices, for example, for train or these kind of things. A second project I wanted to speak to you today is XR platform project. And this one is specifically interesting because it's really linked with the industry field. It's a project we have with a labor company. And in fact, the objective is to create or to help people, or at least non-specialist users of AI, to create experiences of formation using artificial intelligence. So that can be VR task, images, video, and all these things to optimize the knowledge acquisition. And why it is important for the really specialized work of the people who work with a really difficult situation or these kind of things is because first, when you use nuclear or energy field, for example, you have to work on the pipelines, which can be really difficult to assess, really difficult, in fact, to train for. And when you just enter the company, is really complicated. So that allows, in fact, the companies to make formation about this really specific task. So to use this formation for the high complexity they can have, but also bridging the skills gap between a senior person in the company and a junior one, and of course to faster and be more effective in the learning path. Because of course, if you have to work on a pipeline, for example, you cannot do it just one time, but several times, so to be perfectly adaptive for after going to the field and do it yourself. In security, of course. Almost the last project I wanted to present you is Aramis project. So it's a project I am into with two other of my colleagues. And this project is about detecting the bias in generative AI. So we have two types of generative AI. We have the textual one and we have the images generation. Here I'm presenting you only the images generation. We have already wrote 2 papers about this thematic. The objective of this project is to detect the bias in the responses of the LLM and try to attenuate them. So as you can see here, we have on the left and on the right 2 types of situations. I'm going to come back on that like really later. It's a bit blurry, I'm sorry for that. So in fact, we are going to use 4 types of LLM, which are ChatGPT, Leonardo, Copilot, and Standard Diffusion. And we are going to create, in fact, really neutral prompt without implicit, in fact, bias, context, or harmful content. For example, show me a nurse and a doctor, or show me a custodian, and we let the LLMs creating the images. Okay? What you have on the left, for example, show me a nurse and a doctor, you can already see that for ChatGPT, the images it's going to produce, it's always a couple, man and female, Caucasian, relatively young. The male is always a doctor, and the female is always assigned the nurse work. For Leonardo, for example, is a little bit different. The man is going to be a little bit older, still the doctor. The nurse is going to be the woman. And in that specific LLM, the nurse is going to have always also black skin. For Stable Diffusion is a little bit more equilibrated between the gender, because in that case, all the women we have, all the work, we have observed are women, in fact. There is no male in any of the generation we have made. And for Copilot, is a little bit more also equilibrated, except that we have not noticed, in fact, any generation of dark skin color in the images. So that gives, in fact, like already a lot of other LLM have been trained, in fact, on the dataset, which kind of bias we can observe in the datasets they have been training for. And what we are trying to do in this project is to determine the kind of bias we are in front of, if it's a gender bias, a social bias, an ethnicity bias. So we make statistics about the images, and after we try to attenuate them. So we have several techniques about that. We can make some filters, in fact, in the LLM. We can make autocorrection, asking the LLM, for example, to try to correct himself, making him learning, in fact, his own mistakes. Or we can make a word analysis. If I'm using a specific word, why you put that in more in the male field than the woman field, for example. So we are training these kind of techniques to try to attenuate the bias in generative AI. And the last project I'm going to speak to you about before beginning the core of the presentation is predictive AI in biotechnology. So I am not an expert in biotechnology at all or in protein at all, but the Dr. Yale is. And the objective of the project is to determine and optimize the protein production. So it's a project which is in collaboration with a startup, which is called BioC3 here on the right. And there is two main objectives. The first one is interesting because it allows to accelerate the drug development and the therapeutics, but also to support sustainable and green technology. And how they do that, there is two main methods. The first one is to build, in fact, a multimodal dataset, which take into account the protein sequences, the 3D structures of the cells, but also biological filters of interest. And they are putting that into multimodal model. So it's a development predictive model based on language and structural models. For the moment, they have already really good results. They are applying for NeurIPS this year, and they are continuing, in fact, this kind of research with BioC3 and probably other companies. Which leads me finally to the cause of presentation, my second project, which is integrating AI and biomechanics for sport injury prediction. So I am not alone on this kind of project. I am with another doctor, which is called Anis Trabelsi. And it's a project which is in between different collaborators. So we both come from Talan company. We come, in fact, for the artificial intelligence knowledge in that kind of project. But we have also the ENSAM, which is art and métier, in fact, in the top. And they come with a biotechnology model and the biomechanics competencies. And we have the Stade Français Paris, which is, I will not say just the data collection, because it's true that we make, in fact, all that on a really specific type of person, which is professional athletes. But they have also high-skilled doctors and therapists and all the knowledge about their players, which are really important, in fact, to understand this kind of subject. So in Talan, we have already, in fact, worked on several kind of projects with sports and prevention of injury, especially with the Dr. Cervoni, in fact. The first one is the machine learning approaches to predict injury in a five-a-side football that you can find really easily on the internet. And the second one is the prevention and self-rehabilitation of osteoarticular disorder assisted by artificial intelligence. The second project is particularly interesting because it led to the build-up of an application which is called RecoveUp. What you have to do is really simple. When you have an injury of your ankle or finger, whatever, you put, in fact, your symptoms in the application and it will give you some exercise to try to feel better. 2-3 days after, you come back on the application, you say if you're feeling better or not, if that maybe worsen, and it will give you some other, of course, exercise to do to try to improve your situation. That doesn't mean that you don't have to go to see a doctor, but still that can help you for minor injuries. The subject I wanted to speak to you about today is a bit different from the two previous, in the sense that we are looking at a really specific type of injury, which is the anterior cruciate ligament, or ACL, rupture, which occur mainly in the population for really high performance athletes, like the rugbymen in general. And which is interesting, in fact, with the persons of the Stade Français is that they are professional athletes, so they are highly trained, they are already professional taking care, in fact, of their knees specifically, but still 70% of their injuries concern ACL ruptures. So why we are doing this project today? Well, of course, having an ACL injury is problematic for the player himself, of course, but also there is a significant impact on the club. Why? Because there is a loss of performance. You're losing probably a really good player, like it happened, in fact, for the French captain during the Six Nations tournament, despite the fact that we have won. I know that. And also a high financial cost, because a player which is not playing on the field costs a lot of money for the club. And of course, having or experiencing an ACL injury rupture is a long time recovery because you have to make a surgery to operate, and it can take between 6 to 1 year, in fact, 6 months to 1 year to recover completely and eventually to come back to the game. So how does an ACL injury occur? Well, first of all, you have to know that it occurs mainly without direct contact with another person, with a direct opponent. It's often when you're twisting a movement around your knee or when there is a sudden changes of direction. So that's really important to know because it's mostly the kind of situation where the rugby players are faced off. And in fact, the rupture is quite sudden because it happened 50 milliseconds when the foot touches the ground. So we are going to look at a signal which is extremely short. They are caused mainly by biomechanical and neuromuscular factors. It can be of two types. The first one is an unbalanced muscle coactivation ratio between the muscles, or there is a delayed activation, muscle activation. And these two effects here, in fact, they are just preventing sufficient protection around the knee, and thus that leads to the rupture of the ligament. So the main question of this project is to know if we can identify in advance whether a player is at risk of an ACL rupture or not, and more precisely, if we can use EMG signals, electromyogram signals, to identify neuromuscular activation patterns that can be associated with an increased risk of rupture or ligament rupture. So for the persons who don't know which is an EMG signal, it's just an electric complex signal in general, really noisy, which register in fact the muscle activity. So it's what you have on the left figure here when the person is walking, when your muscle is activated, that produce high amplitude on the signals. And it is how you can recognize in fact the contraction of the muscle when it is not. And what we are going to use in fact in this study is specific type of EMG or electromyogram. We are not going to put an EMG inside the muscle of the person. We are going to use only surface EMG. So there is also probably a little bias about that kind of technology because of course the person can sedate a little bit, move a little bit, and so move the electromyogram. We are aware about that, but we don't want to injure neither of the players. So about the data collection themselves. We have 5 muscles to record, which are 3 about the quadriceps and 2 about the hamstrings. Okay? These 5 muscles are recording for every player. We have 11 players, and for both legs, the right and the left. That means for one person, we have 10 electrodes. And then there is after the phase of the acquisition itself. So how it's happening, we have, imagine with the Stade Français and the ENSAM, 2 types of scenarios. The first one is a planned scenario. It means there is no risk of injury specific because the person already knows in which direction he's going to run. How it's happening, you have a person here in the green field, is going to run 15 meters in between, in fact, the 2 yellow, I don't know if you see that online, so I'm going to try to, 2 yellow here, points. So the person is going to run here. At this moment, someone is going to throw it the ball, the rugby ball, to make it a bit like a field condition. And the person, if he's in a planned scenario, is already know if he has to go to the left or to the right. Left or right. That is not so close to the field condition because in fact in the field condition, when you have a player in front of you, you don't know yet if you are going to go to the right or to the left. So there is a second type of scenario we have think of, which is called the unplanned scenario. And in this scenario, we are trying in fact to simulate as maximum the field condition. And for that, what we have imagined is that the player will not know until the really last moment if he has to go to the left or to the right. And it's what you have here. So here, in fact, in this image, you are at the place of the player. You're going to run in that direction. In between the 2 yellow things, you're going to receive a ball. And you have a little television here in this square, which is going to tell you at the exact moment you're passing these 2 things, if you have to go to the left or to the right. And we have, according to some studies and to the results, is what's working the best in terms of unplanned scenarios. That means that we can, in fact, be close to the field condition or to put the player at the risk of injury. We haven't put any player of risk of injury completely. No one has been harmed in this study, all right? Everyone is perfectly healthy. But still, it was really to try to be as close as possible to the field condition. So in that manipulation, we have 11 players have been okay to spare us their body and their muscles for these studies. And we have been using almost 2,000 EMG signals for this study. There is 3 types of scenario with unplanned situation and 2 unplanned, planned and 3 unplanned, sorry, which lead like to this kind of amount of EMG signals in total. So let's speak now a little bit about the processing and the algorithm used to respond to the main question of these studies. We have to know that first, the EMG signals will look like something you have here on the blue part. So you already see that there is some outlier who have to be removed to analyze the signals. So we have a phase of pre-processing the signals, clean the signal, that means delete the outlier windows. So like the blue you have just here. We met like traditional processing or signal processing, I would say, because after we have to demin the signals, and after we have to build up again the missing part of the signals to avoid, in fact, having non-missing value or 0 during the signal, which can false, in fact, our prediction and our results. So how we have been doing that? For the window, you have a little on this figure. I'm here, okay. On this figure here, you have in blue the original signals. In red is when the outlier have been removed. And the green is the pre-processed signals when you can see the demin because we are around 0 now. And to replace, in fact, the non-missing value here, we have been using the previous window with the same number of samples. Why we have been doing that? One is to preserve the frequency content of the signals. And 2, because we have been trying to add white noise, and it was, in fact, too complicated to do it. We just move one window and duplicate it. It was really easy, in fact, for the algorithm. So finally, you will obtain from the blue signals the gray one. And after, we will see in the next slides that I've been using also the spectrum of these signals, in fact, for the prediction and the classification of the signals, and a bit less the spectrogram, which is, for the persons who don't know, is the frequency content versus the time. So you have, for example, the high amplitude here are retrieved, high energy, sorry, are retrieved by the really strong amplitude you have here in the signals. This EMG here corresponds to only one muscle for one person. So it's 1 over the 10 I have been speaking to you about. Of course, we have 10 per player each time per scenario. So in this project, we have been using 2 types of methodology. The first one is a machine learning part, which is where I have been using, in fact, unsupervised and supervised methods, using features extraction on the temporal and the spectral domain, what I've told you about the frequency content. And I've been after using a classification using random forest, gradient boosting, or decision trees algorithm. The second part of this presentation has been done mainly by my colleague, which is specialized in deep learning. And he has been using 3 types, in fact, of algorithm, which is a classical neural network for signal classification, a ResNet, which is effective for model for data with complex pattern, like it's the case, in fact, for EMG signals. And the last one is TCN, which is adapted to temporal dependencies. I remind you that the objective of the project is to determine if we have a little signal of interest, which can tell us if the person is at a risk of injury. So in fact, we can also simplify the problem to determine if the person already knew the direction he was going to run or not. So determine if it's an unplanned or planned scenario. Before continuing this presentation, I have to speak to you about the complexity of the dataset, which is the cycle of running and muscle activations. So it's not from my work, it's a paper from the Kakehata in 2021. You have in the really upper part of of the plot a person running. So in fact, there is 2 cycles here. The first one from IFS to IFS2 and the IFS2 to IFS2. Okay? Let's begin just by the first part we see in the first cycle. You have 2 types of muscle, the BF and the RF, which correspond to the biceps femoris and the rectus femoris. The I before is for ipsilateral leg, and the C before is a contralateral leg. Okay? So let's focus only for the first leg, which corresponds to this part here. You can see that when the person begins to run, one muscle here is going to be activated. So you have a high amplitude on the EMG signals, followed by relatively slow phase in the signal, followed again by high amplitude on the EMG, which is the inverse for the IRF, the rectus femoris, which is going to be activated while the other one is activated. So it's a bit anti-correlated, I will say, in terms of activation. But if you look at after the other leg, which is this one, these 2 lines, the green one and the yellow one, you will see that when one leg is in fact in the rest phase, in fact the other leg is not completely in the rest phase, is contracted too, and there is a little bit of activation of other muscles. Why I wanted to go, in fact, by showing you this plot is that looking at EMG signals is really complicated because all the muscles are activated, co-activated at the same time. So when we are trying to look at one specific signals for, I don't know, the biceps femoris, probably the other muscle, the antagonist one, will be in the rest phase. Maybe it will be half contractions. Maybe it will be different for every player. So that give a representation of the dataset really complicated. But let's continue on the results of this project. So the first part has been to use unsupervised machine learning on the full signals. The full signals is when the person begins to run until the moment he finishes to run, so after he changed direction. Okay? All the signals is around between 7 seconds to 9 seconds, depending on the person, depending how fast it is while running. And what we have been doing is we have taken the signals already pre-processed, so filtered and the outlier removed. And we have been computing a lot of features you can retrieve here on the right, that part here. So it will be statistical features, entropy features, and shape descriptor features. And we have been computing that by a window of 300 samples, which corresponds approximately to 0.14 seconds, over the full signals with an overlap of 30 seconds. So it's sliding windows where we compute all these features during 7 seconds. Okay? What I've been trying to do here is to look at this evolution of these features over time and to determine if just looking at the signals and looking at the evolution of the features, I have a little signal of interest somewhere. Well, without surprise, I didn't find anything convincing at this moment. I believe because the signals are in fact extremely complex, that is one muscle of one leg for only one person, and you can see that even for one muscle, the amplitude of this contraction is really different from this one, if different for the third one, is different from the last one, and in fact the length of the signals where the muscle is contracted is already different for one unique person. So I have been trying something else. Instead of looking only at the full signal, I have been really concentrated on the impact zone. The impact zone is the moment the person is going to change direction. It's the last moment before the person is going to change direction. That means it's a moment where the risk is the highest in case if there is an ACL injury. I remind you again, the risk of injury is the highest within the first 50 milliseconds after the foot contacts the ground. That means just before the changes of direction. Okay? This time corresponds to the impact time, and it corresponds on the plot up on the dashed red line you have just here. Okay? What I've been doing is that I've been after trying to find the time cycle T1, which is the first blue line you have here. And from these two lines, so the first blue and the red, I have been taking the same number of samples between these two and these two, so that give me approximately 1400 samples, which correspond in fact to 0.7 seconds around the time of impact. So I'm really looking into the signals now. And I have been doing sliding windows, again, of approximately 100 samples, which correspond to 40 milliseconds. That means that I am exactly in the range of time of the possible risk of injury. By doing that, by sequencing my signal into small windows and making a sliding window and computing features still in the temporal and frequency domain, I have been able, after, in fact, to classify the signals to learn, in fact, my algorithm, which is a decision tree. I have tried the random forest, I have tried the random boosting, and the decision tree, in fact, gave me a good prediction, over 72% of good prediction, telling me that at 72%, he is able to tell me that this kind of EMG signals come from an unplanned scenario, from a planned scenario. So 70% of this EMG, which are at risk of injury rather than the others. And also, because it's not just that, I have been also searching which are the good features for the classification, which are the most important features used by the algorithm. And he told me that, the results are that, in fact, the window and the waveform lengths are the best discriminator to classify the signals. Well, okay, 72% is not bad, but can we improve this kind of prediction? For that, I've been using now a supervised machine learning method. Why? Because we already know, in fact, which phases are important in the signals. We can try to force the algorithm, in fact, to look at specific moments during the 7 seconds, maybe concentrate only on the impact zone. And from that, we can say to the algorithm to learn the similarities and the differences, of course, between the different classes we will give to the signals. So there is now a phase of labeling the data, which is different from the first phase when we were, in fact, going without knowledge, I will say. Now we are knowing and we are looking at specific features. So I've been differentiating 3 kinds of phase. The first one is a rest phase. We'll consider mainly when the moment is, in fact, not touching the ground, a bit in the air, and where the muscle is not activated. We have seen that it's still a really big question, and the contraction is still something that we have to define maybe more precisely, specifically with the doctors and the biomechanician, There is a second phase, which is called the contraction phase, mainly recognized on the EMG signal by a high amplitude on the time series. And finally, there is the impact phase, which is directly extracted from the record and from the dataset, in fact. And we can already label this kind of data and all the windows touching, in fact, that time by impact zone. So how I've been doing that, of course, it's not just to look at the EMG and the time series like this. I've been using, in fact, the signal properties as a function of the root mean square level, RMS level. It's a bit different. And I have doing that only on the impact zone, not on the full signals, which is really important to keep in mind. So how it's look like for the moment, I still haven't finished, in fact, this kind of work because we are still other complication. If you look at the EMG, which is corresponding, in fact, to the gray line here on this plot down, you will have different phases. And from the RMS you have here, I've put a threshold of 0.15, and every, in fact, moment the curve is above this level, I will label the data as a contraction phase, except, of course, the impact zone here, where the RMS is also above 0.15, but will be directly labeled as the impact zone because I already know that corresponds exactly at the last moment before the changes of direction. And the rest will be just labeled as the rest zone. Normally, there is no contraction or specific contraction of the muscles. Of course, we have to discuss that yet because still the dataset is really complex. Now, let's speak a bit about the deep learning algorithm. So, what we have been trying to do, we have been using, in fact, 3 types of algorithm, which is a normal CNN, a ResNet, and a TCN. And what we are trying to do is to seek features from the signals. So in particular, we are trying to determine if there is some similarities between the training dataset and the signals we are analyzing using deep learning techniques. And in fact, to explain fastly this plot, you have the window size, in fact, on the left, looking just here. And you can see that, so it's in milliseconds, sorry to precise that just now. So here you have 3.5 seconds, 1.7, 1.1, and 100 milliseconds. And you have the accuracy and the F1 score, in fact, of each model after on this column here on the right. What you can see is that the best model for the moment is a normal CNN network. It's a bit better than the TCN, and which is even a little bit better than the ResNet. Nonetheless, which is a little bit weird, in fact, in the results we have obtained, is that more the window used to this kind of classification is wide, so long, more the precision is good, and more we are close to the impact zone, because we are still around the impact zone, but we are expanding a bit the window, in fact, and more we are focused just on the impact zone, and less the classification is good. Still 62% is not bad, but it's still not 92%. Which is interesting with that kind of method is we can directly, in fact, make a visualization of the discriminating zone used by the algorithm to make the classification using GradCam. So here you have on the left a plot of several EMG signals for only one person for a pre-planned scenario, so the person already knows in which direction he's going, all right? In blue, you have all the muscle of the left leg. On the red, is all the muscles of the right leg. The color bar you have on the plot is the intensity of activation, more easily said. In blue is when the algorithm find this window not accurate, in fact, to make the classification. It doesn't really look like to the dataset, the training dataset. And in red, here, he found that these specific windows are literally really similar to the training dataset. Which is interesting in that case is that you have in the yellow here, in the dashboard yellow, the moment of the impact, like before. And the first window, which is the most important window because that shows that the classification has been made according to this window, is really close to the moment of the impact, showing that this specific zone shows that, in fact, there is something determinant to identify if it's planned or unplanned scenario. And this window, moreover, is a little bit less than 100 milliseconds of length. Now I'm going to speak about the confusion matrix you have on the right, which is discutable, of course, and I'm going to come back on that on the conclusion of this presentation. We have only 24 samples, in fact, to analyze. It's a really short data set, and the deep learning algorithm normally needs a really lot I say, data to learn. That means that he has been learning on a kind of all the data set, and we have tested only a really small amount. That means also that the risk of overfitting is high, and it's also maybe why we have that good results. So as you can see, there is only one sample per category, which is planned or unplanned or highly risky or not risky, which have been not good classified, which is an extremely good score, of course, but still discutable. So for the first conclusion of this work, we have been trying to use unsupervised machine learning to identify the best features from the EMG signals. We have good classification between planned and unplanned scenario, around 75% of accuracy, which is not bad for the moment. And of course, these results are really good because we are working only around the impact zone, which is the most important to look at. We are trying to improve, in fact, these unsupervised machine learning techniques by using supervised machine learning techniques, by labeling, in fact, the data set, trying to find the good features to determine the specificity of each kind of zone, which can after be used in the unsupervised machine learning techniques. And finally, we have the deep learning algorithm. We are still working on that because we believe that there is a huge advantage, in fact, to use deep learning, despite the size of the dataset. I'm going to come back on that. The problem is that we don't know which features are used by the deep learning algorithm to make the classification. And the risk of overfitting is really high because, of course, the dataset is really small. Which leads me to maybe one of the most important slides of the presentation, which are, in fact, the challenges encountered in this project. First, we have to keep in mind that there is a variability in the muscle activation timing. As I've shown you on the EMG signals, there is sometimes amplitude or, contraction of really high amplitude, some others which are really long in time. That means like intrinsec variability, in fact, which are difficult to understand. Which lead, in fact, to the second point, there is individual physiological differences. The muscle mass of people, all the muscles are integrating in the bones, the ligament, all that is different for absolutely everyone. So to make generalization of our results is complicated. The third point is the muscle activation signature. Each person has a unique muscular activation pattern. That means that the waveforms are normally a bit different for every one of us, which add complication and difficulties to make a generalization. And finally, the limited dataset size. You have seen we've been working with only 11 players. It's 11 players who come from, in fact, a range of population which is extremely specialized. Of course, we can't use this kind of techniques for a broad population yet because we don't have the data, in fact, as simply as that. So using a really small dataset size reduces, of course, the robustness and the reliability of the models and the analysis of the studies. But we have some good news, because there is some good news. We still continue on the supervised machine learning, as I've told you before. We have the fusion of deep learning algorithm. That means we are trying, in fact, to take the best of each algorithm and trying to fuse them to have better results. We have also a new dataset, which have been made 1 month ago, something like that, with the Pink Rocket League, which is a feminine rugby woman of the Stade Français, which are also professional rugby players. And why it's important to have the woman in this, I will say, a research project is because the risk of ACL injury for women is 4 times more important than men. So in fact, there is maybe even more, in fact, things to see and things to understand for women than men because they are more propense to make ACL injury. Of course, including the women in our data set add more complexity because the physiognomy of male and female are different. It's why we have, which is still in completion, is to use markerless data combined with X-ray. We have been doing, in fact, X-ray of all the players to determine their bones and the moment where the muscles are activated and where the roots of the muscles and ligament are, in fact. And we are using it to make markerless data. So it will be kind of unique for each player, of course, but also it can be after used in the deep learning algorithm to determine the forces, the little tendon and all that for the deep learning algorithm and so to improve the prediction. There is something I haven't speak to you about, but which is in the same lens as the markerless data and X-ray, but it will be in the few months nonetheless. It will be to use like the eye tracking for each player because in fact players are really sensitive to where they are looking at and how in fact to avoid a component. I mean another rugby player. And so we are preparing to use eye tracking using a VR car or directly in fact little glasses on the field like that the player can run and play and we will see in fact or determine where the player is taking his information in the field before changing direction. Maybe that can help us to better understand in fact the EMG signals and thus to complete this study in general. Thank you.